Welcome to the Critically Numb podcast, where questions are everything and answers are debatable. Welcome to episode 2. Once again, this is Louise and
This is Sean.
we are going to be discussing why it is hard to ask the difficult questions. I had to think about that one because I suppose you could put it either or way.
Yeah, you really did make it sound hard to ask the question.
Anyway, so that is the subject tonight, and we're going to kick off. I'm going to let Sean just go ahead and get right into it.
Okay, so why is it hard for people to ask difficult questions? Obviously, the big thing would be fear. But when you say fear, there's a lot of directions that you can take that into. There's a lot of sort of avenues that spreads into. So if I had to give it a topic, I'd probably call it stepping out of your comfort zone, because I think that is what people are most afraid of, is to step out of their comfort zone. And when you start asking questions, especially difficult questions, you have to step out of your comfort zone, almost like into the world of the unknown, because questions will always take you further than where you are at the moment. If you don't ask the questions, then you'll just stay where you are. And people don't want to step out of their comfort zone because, let's be honest, it's comfortable. And at the end of the day, who doesn't want to be comfortable? So that would be one reason, is that people are comfortable with where they are. Kind of like the ignorance is bliss kind of thing. So you don't want to know more, because knowing more doesn't always necessarily lead to peace. So, like we always say, there's that rabbit hole you go down. Once you go down the rabbit hole, you got to go all the way down to Wonderland. You can't stop halfway. So one question leads to another question, leads to another question. And that way it will sort of pull you out of the comfort zone.
I can completely relate with that in my own life. Obviously, and I think most people can relate with that. There has been times in my life where I can look back and honestly say that there was probably the times that I didn't want to ask the question, because in asking the question, for me, comes with that the reality of actually looking within yourself. Because asking the big questions, you need to then discover the truth within yourself. And if you're lying to yourself, or if there's things that you need to change in yourself, do you think that I'm right?
Yeah, so that would be my next point, would be people don't ask the questions because they would be afraid of the answers. So a lot of the times, so even recently, there's been some questions that I've asked, especially about church and about doctrine, that I don't know if I was ready for the answer, because the answers I received rocked my faith. So a lot of people would then not ask the question because they're afraid of what answer they might receive. Now, you saying looking inside yourself, right? So sometimes you have to ask yourself difficult questions, okay? Am I a good father? Am I a good husband? Is the denomination of the church I go to correct? Is my faith correct? Whatever the case may be. And with those questions that you ask yourself, you have to then look internally. And that's not always easy, because you then have to perhaps accept the truth that maybe you're not a good father. Maybe you spend the whole weekend watching sport and you don't spend any time with your kids, and all your kid wants to do is play ball with you. But you have to come to that realization, which means you'll have to accept that truth about yourself. Not an easy thing to do all the time.
Yeah, because you think that you're doing the things that you enjoy and are good for you. People want to say, yes, but it's my life too. I'm allowed to do these things, but there's always a balance in things. I mean, we're talking about everyday things now, aside from church, aside from faith, everyday things. I mean, it could get to the point that you're also somebody who's a workaholic. The first thing I thought of was was somebody who goes to the gym way too often, but he's not actually competing for anything. But he's in there, and he's in the gym, and he's pumping the weights, and he's pumping the steroids, but is he actually making money from it? I don't know why I thought of that, but that was the image that came to mind. So that in itself could be an obsession that's stopping you from actually seeing the truth about yourself.
Well, I mean, there's a good point. I mean, so a lot of these guys who, let's say for argument's sake, do go to gym and do hit the steroids, and they never really look inside themselves and go, why am I actually doing this? Is it because I am unhappy with who and what I am? Maybe I'm trying to use this gym story to cover up some other stuff in my life. So most people are very happy to leave the stuff in the attic or leave their stuff in the basement, whichever part of the world you live in.
Yeah.
And never want to go down there, never want to go take a look. And that would then sort of come on to my next point, which would be afraid of taking responsibility.
Yes.
Because when you ask questions, right, not just are people afraid of the answers, but now you've asked a question. Now you've received the answer. Let's say you've received the answer that you aren't a good dad, right? Now you have to take responsibility for that answer. Now you're going to have to change your life. Now you're going to have to take steps in order to become a better father. Or the guy who goes to gym and takes the steroids because he's trying to fulfill something in himself that perhaps only God can fulfill, or whatever the case is. You know, there's something lacking inside of himself. Now he's asked the question. Now he's realized, wait a minute, there is something lacking inside of myself. There is some empty space that I'm trying to fill up with all these steroids and this gym and all this stuff. Now that you've realized that, now what? Now you have to take responsibility for your life and go, okay, fine. I've now asked this question. I've now received this answer. Now, how am I going to change this? And not only in that regard is there responsibility, but let's take it from a Christian point of view. Mm-hmm. Let's say you're in church, right? Something the pastor says is not according to the Bible, right? Now, so you've asked the question now, you've now received this answer that you are correct. The Bible doesn't say that. Now you have a responsibility. You as the Christian now has a responsibility to go up to your pastor and say, hey, I don't think you were correct about this because in the Bible it says A, B, C, and D. So there's a responsibility to finding the truth about yourself, or just having the truth in general. There's a responsibility. Jesus gave us the truth. Now we have a responsibility with it. It's not a responsibility that should be taken lightly, but there's definitely a responsibility with truth.
So again, as you said that, I thought of a scenario. If you saw something, let's say you saw somebody in a shop put a stick of Chappies bubble gum, whatever, Chappies, does that even exist anymore? Yes, it does. Anyway, a stick of gum from the shops into their pocket and walk out. And you saw this and you knew that they've stolen it. Do you keep walking on, or do you go to the manager and say, excuse me, I just saw that person steal something? Because is it not then your responsibility to speak the truth? The reason I give that example is in most circumstances, people would be like, oh, absolutely. I think most people would be like, absolutely, I would say something. Would you be willing to speak up for the truth? Because that means that you need to take responsibility for what you've been shown. I may have said that. Yeah. Anyway.
Yes. No. That's exactly correct. You need to take responsibility for the truth that you've received by asking these questions. So if I ask a question about church history, I didn't understand something. Now I've received this truth, and I realize, oh hell, for the last 2,000 years the church has been lying. Now what do I do with this truth? Now I have a responsibility, because now I have it. So it would have been easier if I never asked the question and never had and never found this answer, because then I wouldn't have had I wouldn't have been responsible for it.
Yes.
So now you have the responsibility for it, which then brings me on to the next point.
Yeah.
Which is laziness.
Yes.
Laziness is another reason why people don't ask difficult questions, and it's laziness in two different ways. Number one is laziness in researching what you believe in. Okay? We accept what people tell us to be the truth.
Yes.
And it's a lot easier if somebody tells you what to believe in than you having to figure it out for yourself. So we have no idea what questions to ask because we've never looked into. I'm just going to use the church again as an example. So if a pastor is standing up there and he's preaching a message that is incorrect, right? Like let's take these prosperity gospel or prosperity preachers for argument's sake.
Yes,
They're preaching a message that is 100% incorrect. You don't know that because you haven't researched it yourself. You've never read your Bible. You've never listened to any other pastor except these prosperity preachers. You got no idea how many different sides of the arguments, so to say, there is, or is there even another doctrine? Is this the only doctrine that's out there? You have done absolutely no research, which again comes back to responsibility, because you're not taking responsibility for your faith then. You need to look into what you believe in. But people don't want to do it because it's far easier to just go, no man, that pastor, he studied for 4, maybe 5 years. He must know what he's talking about.
But what we forget is that, because also when you say the word research, my brain says, don't research just one side of the information. You need to research all sides of the information. What did that group say? What did that group say? What did that group say? What happened to that group? What didn't happen to that group? Because those things are, the facts are that some things have been swept under the carpet to appease a certain power, whether it was a government or a church leader or whatever. I'm using the church now as an example as well. But in history, I think that's shown over time that if you don't research different sides, you're going to only get the one-sided truth. That's like going to two people who are getting divorced and you say, well, why are you getting divorced? I'll just ask the husband why he's getting divorced and not ask the wife, because that would be really incorrect.
So there's always 3 sides to a story.
Correct.
My side, your side, and the truth.
Yes, exactly.
And people don't want to look into things because, like I said, it's just easier to go, oh, that guy must know what he's talking about. He's got a PhD. Why would he not know what he's talking about? Well, have you ever asked the question whether he does or doesn't? Is the denomination you're going to the correct one? And this is what ties in into the next point, which would be laziness in thinking. Just thinking lazy. So you just take everything at surface, at face value.
So it's like shallow thinking.
It's shallow thinking. Everything is this oversimplified way of seeing the world. So you never dig deeper. So if somebody tells you that, I'm trying to think of a good example to use now. Let's take this example. I actually heard this example on a podcast in the last 2 days. There's a guy who says that this one race of people is responsible for the way the world is today. Right? He's a racist, right? That's an oversimplified view. If you were to start poking him on that view and go, but are you sure that it's just this race of people that are responsible for the destruction of the world? Are you sure it's not maybe economical stuff? Are you sure it's not other powers? Are you sure it's not world systems? Are you sure it's not all races of people? That's a very oversimplified way of looking at life. But a lot of people look at life exactly like that. It's this oversimplified view. It's their fault. That guy's right. That guy's wrong. They don't ever look at the nuances or the shades of grey attached to topics. They only ever see the black and white. That's actually a better way of saying it. I think we're now coming to what I think are probably the biggest reasons as to why people don't ask difficult questions. The other things were big reasons, afraid of the answers, afraid of taking responsibility, laziness in researching beliefs, laziness in the way you actually think about things. You don't ever dig deeper into things.
Shallow thinking.
But the biggest things, I think, is people are afraid of being judged. People are afraid of being kicked out of communities, and people are afraid of like a loss of status. So if you start asking difficult and critical questions in organizations or environments that you're in, people are going to start labeling you as either crazy or they're going to
conspiracy
theory, or they're going to label you as something, or they're going to kick you out, right wing, left wing, whatever. And they're going to kick you out of the organization eventually. So you lose that community, and people have become so set in being part of that community that they are so afraid to rock that boat that they are even willing to believe a lie. So God might reveal a truth to them, and they'll push it aside, because the minute they start speaking that truth or asking questions around it, they might get asked to leave that community. And it's a big thing for people.
Yeah.
That loss of community is scary, because now you got to think to yourself, do I really want to give that up for the sake of the truth, when I can just carry on believing a lie and still have my coffee on Sunday and have my Sunday seat at church?
Well, I mean, from the other side of it, it's not just from a community perspective. If you're somebody who's in it and your livelihood depends on it, because in churches, there are people that do get paid in churches, especially with the bigger churches. People earn an income from that. But if they've been given the truth now and they start walking forward with that, getting kicked out, told to leave, step down from your position is very likely until you get yourself sorted out.
And these kind of things, people might think it doesn't happen in Christian society and communities, but unfortunately, that's exactly what happens. I have heard, I'm not going to say hundreds, but I've heard hundreds of stories of people who, just because they've spoken out against the Trinity, they got kicked out of church.
Or told to step down.
Or told to just sit there and excuse my language, but sit there and shut up. Yeah. You're not allowed to share your faith. You're not allowed to ask these questions, because, like I said, people are afraid to not. People aren't just afraid of you asking the question; they're afraid of actually having to answer the question. And this stuff happens. It happens in communities. It happens. So if you're a Jehovah's Witness and you wake up one day going, "Oh, I think this whole Jehovah's Witness thing is fake. I'm going to go tell I don't know if they've got pastors or priests or whoever runs the Jehovah's Witness church." What do you think they're going to do to you? They're going to either kick you out, or they're going to,
and everyone in the
excommunicate you, or whatever the word is.
So, and it's not far from that in the evangelist churches as well, because people do. If they start asking the bigger questions, as you've said, we've heard plenty stories now where people do get asked to leave, step down. We do know of one that we've listened to where he was a teacher in Israel, and he was asked to leave. He had to make that choice himself. That's a whole new conversation in itself. But yes, I completely understand that.
So that is how society is set up. So society in itself is a stumbling block for asking questions, because we are all so fragile in our faith, and we are petrified of getting asked questions, and we are petrified of asking questions. Society is set up in a way that if you ask questions, it's going to lead to conflict. So that is what we all believe. If I ask you this question, you're going to get offended, and that's going to be the end of the conversation. So we're afraid of offending each other. But how society was always supposed to be, and especially church, it was supposed to be open and honest. You were supposed to be able to go speak to your elder and say, "I don't understand this. I don't believe this. I don't think what you're teaching is in the Bible." And that guy should have been gracious enough and strong enough in his faith to have sat down and been able to answer your questions. But certain things you can ask questions about, but the real difficult stuff, people shy away from.
Yes.
I don't know why that is. And like I said, I believe that's how society has set it up. You can't tell your boss that he's being a terrible boss to you, because then he'll be an even more terrible boss to you. So if you tell that guy, if you go and tell your church, "Listen here, I don't believe in the Trinity," then the next moment your pastor's going to be preparing sermons against you.
Yes.
And that's the reality of it. So why would anybody? So it's kind of like the Catholic Church was. back in the day, there were certain, let's just call them, I can't think of the proper word now, but let's just call them, there were certain rules, right, that you had to follow in the Catholic Church. And you followed those rules, and those things ensured that your path to salvation was secure, right? But if you didn't follow those rules, or you spoke out against it, then you would have been executed.
Yes.
You know, heretics were burnt at the stake and all sorts of stuff, crazy stuff. So why would anybody have during that time, why would anybody have asked the question? Why would anybody have picked their hand
Because
up
of
and
fear
said,
of their life.
sorry, Your Holiness, but I think you're wrong. You know, you would have been murdered. You would have been killed for that. You know, it hasn't changed. People think it's changed. It hasn't changed. Yes, sure, we're not getting executed anymore.
Burnt at the stake.
We're not getting burnt at the stake, but we're getting kicked out. You know,
Still getting burnt.
still getting burnt one way or another.
Yeah.
But people are so afraid of answering questions. People are so afraid of having communities that ask questions, because it's a lot easier to control communities and to control the people that are in your community and the people that pay for your beautiful building, if they don't ask questions, if they just sit there and accept everything you say as being the gospel truth. But people will stand in pulpits and preach and say, hey, read your Bible and read it for yourself. And then when you do read it for yourself and you read something different from what they're saying, you can't come and ask them about it. But they want you to read it for yourself.
Yes.
So
As long as you read it for yourself and then you came to the same
yes,
conclusion.
as long as as long as you read it and you come to the same conclusion, or your narrative is the same as theirs, then it's great. But if you read it and it's a completely different narrative, or you go, but what you're saying, it doesn't say it in there, you know.
I think what I'm also getting from this is that we need to learn to take the glasses off of the preconceived ideas, the things that we have been taught, and read it with an open mind. I heard a part of scripture the other day in Genesis where it speaks of God putting two lights in the sky, one to rule the day, one to rule the night. When I say that, what do you think of?
Well, the sun and the moon.
Not fireflies.
Not fireflies.
Okay, so the sun and the moon is exactly what we're talking about. So it's very self-explanatory that is it. We know that some things are ambiguous in the Bible. We understand that. But a lot of it is plain and simple English. In fact, the New Testament was written in Koine Greek, which is known as Common Greek. It's simple language. It's not people who are sesquipedalians. I almost got that right. Sesquipedalians. It's people that were using simple language. So I've got to the point in my life now, honestly, because of the circumstances that we've been thrown into, is to really dive deeper into looking into things and not be a lazy thinker. With that, and maybe this is a good question, how long do we have left?
I know we're way over.
We're way over.
Way over.
Okay. But my last question to you then is, do you think that many things in life within society have been built on too many lies? In your own opinion?
In my own opinion, I'm going to say yes. Because it's that's one of the reasons why people would be afraid of questions, is because they're not even sure what the truth is themselves. So if you know what the truth is and you're comfortable with that truth, then you're not afraid of things. You're not afraid to be asked questions. You're not as fragile, I guess, you know. But it's such a difficult thing, because for us to dig past all these layers of I almost said an ugly word there, of all this nonsense, right, that we've built up over all these thousands of years, it will take a lot, you know. But we have to make a start. Somewhere we have to start. The world doesn't need another church on another street corner. The world doesn't need another denomination. The world needs some of us to stop breaking away because we got too much pride, to work together and to put our differences aside and to stop looking at things that divide us and start looking more at things that unite us. But as regards to the lies, I wish it wasn't so. But the minute you start asking these questions and you start peeling back the layers and you start looking just past the veil, it's unfortunate that all you see is lies in one way or another.
Yeah.
And it's a sad case, because for a lot of young Christians, it's a very difficult thing to decide which denomination is telling the truth, which path to follow, where do I find God. I'm trying to think of this analogy, if you want to call it that, where we're kind of in a maze, right? We're trying to I'm still deciding whether we're trying to find, whether we're on the outside of the maze trying to find the center, or whether we're in the center of the maze trying to find the outside. I'm going to go with we're in the center of the maze. And all those paths around us are all the lies that have been told through thousands and thousands of years of society and democracies and monarchies and greed and power and church and all these things. And we're stuck in the middle, and we're trying to find our way out so that we can get to a place where all these walls aren't around us anymore, to a place where we can truly look at things and maybe even truly have a relationship with God. Because as we're walking in this maze and we're going left, oh, it's a wall. We're going right, there's another wall. We have to continuously go back the whole time, start again. Okay, I'm going to go right this time. And that's how life works. You take these steps, you take these corners, you're standing at the crossroad, you go left, next crossroad, you're going to go right. But those roads, there's so many of them. How do you decide which way to take? But we almost have to just keep on going, because we have to start breaking down these layers. If somebody doesn't start asking the questions, if somebody doesn't start doing it, then we are lost. As Christians, we are lost. We have to start working our way out of this maze of tradition and denominations and Catholicism and all these things that we have carried around with us, and all these things of the world that we've carried around with us. Philosophy, traditions, and just ways of the world and all these things. We have to start breaking it down so we can get back to almost like there's a word for them. I think the word is a restorationist. Restorationist? I think it's a restorationist. The concept is very much the same as as first principles. So first principles are, you break something down until you get to somewhere where you know it is true. I've done that now in my walk of faith, where I don't believe anything the church says anymore. And people might disagree with me in that or not. It is kind of irrelevant. I've taken what I've experienced and what I've seen and what I've read in the Bible, and they don't correlate. They just don't correlate. So I've trying to discard everything I've learned from church and from society and from all these things, and I'm trying to get back to sort of first principles, something that I know is absolute, something I know is true. And my starting point on this new journey is God. I believe that God is real. I'm just going to start there.
Yeah.
And forget about what this preacher or that pastor or this one says, and just start from there and try and build something good from there.
Yes.
But as far as I said, like for me, I've said this before, Christianity, I don't think I want to be a Christian anymore. I don't think I want to be associated with that word anymore. Not because of God or because of Jesus, because of the Bible, but because of everything that the church just seems to be and seems to stand for.
Yes.
I've given you this analogy before that the church is like a tree, and it was a beautiful tree. It really was. It was filled with fruit and green leaves and lots of birds, and it was a good tree, shade and grass, and it was amazing. And then people came along and decided to plant a vine next to that tree, and that vine came up, and year by year by year covered more and more and more of the tree. And eventually, after 2,000 years, you don't know which one is the vine and which one is the tree anymore. And I feel that's how the church is, and the world. The church is the tree. God planted something nice and something beautiful and something amazing. And instead of enjoying the shade and eating its fruit, we decided to plant something next to it that is just nonsense. And it is so in that tree now that you wouldn't even know which part to cut off, because you can't see the difference between the tree and the vine. And even the fruit looks like an apple, smells like an apple, but as soon as you bite into it, it sure as hell doesn't taste like an apple anymore. And I think the Reformation kind of did try and trim back that vine a little bit, but they just didn't take it out by the root.
Yeah.
And that root sprung up again. And the church just is confusing. It's confusing to try and figure out what exactly is wrong with it and where exactly we stand with it as a people and as Christians, and what we're supposed to be doing with it. I think, personally, I just break it all down. Break it all down and start again. Start from scratch. Because whatever we're doing now is not working. So we've now spoken for a lot longer than we were supposed to.
Okay.
But I think it was good to just get all that in there.
There's a lot of questions that can come from that. So we encourage anybody who's listening to the podcast that firstly to keep an open mind, because there's probably questions within your own life that you've been asking, and perhaps you want to ask those questions on this podcast. Perhaps you would like to share with us in some or other way. At the end of the day, we are in circumstances in our life, I think in the world, that more and more questions are starting to arise in people because of circumstances and situations that are happening to people. I think it's becoming more and more evident as time goes by. So we encourage you, use in the show notes, we have an email address that you could send your questions to. Alternatively, if it is on YouTube, you can put your questions at the bottom. But we would love for you to engage with us. We love the fact that you spent time with us. And we hope that you will join us again soon. Until next time, we'll leave the podcast where it is. If Sean wants to say anything in closing.
No, I think I've said enough.
Okay.
if anybody's got a question on all the things that we've touched on, like Louisa said, just send us an email. We are trying to start something new.
Yeah.
We are trying to get people to ask questions, and we're trying to get people to have conversations, so that we are starting to break down those layers.
And we're not trying to start a new church.
We're not trying to start a new church.
All right. So thank you very much for joining us, from myself, Louise, and
from me, Sean.
Cheers.
Ciao, ciao.
Thank you for listening to the Critically Numb podcast. We would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment or a question. Alternatively, send us an email to the address listed in the show notes. Until next time, keep questioning.